GRQC as part of a series that they were doing in excellence in various topics. And so the idea was, hey, what if we did an excellence in online education? And it seemed like a very timely topic, given the events of the last year or so. So I reached out to MIT, the Central Alumni Club, and was connected with Krishna Rajagopal, who kindly agreed to present to us this evening. All right, so with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight's talk, and that's David Grome from GRQC. David Grome is a GRQC board member. He leads the GRQC marketing committee, and he's also managing director of Greater Rochester Enterprise, which is an economic development organization focused on attracting new investment and jobs and wealth to the Rochester region. David?
Thanks, Jim, so much. And thanks everyone for coming out tonight. Really excited to share this evening with you and hear more about the magic of MIT and its impact for digital learning, not only for MIT alums and MIT students, but really for many educational institutions. And it's a good segue. In my primary role, we rely so heavily on higher education to foster economic growth. We're very fortunate in the Greater Rochester area to have 19 colleges and universities in our 9-county area. We produce about 19,000 graduates per year. So it's a very integral part of what makes us competitive for businesses that need talent. You know, about 3 to 5 deals right now are being decided by talent. So really excited to hear about ways that can be important. GRQC is a very important organization for the region as well. I love that our vision is really to imagine a place where progress, cooperation, and quality have meaning. It did come out of the early 90s and is based on implementing principles that focus on putting quality practices into products, services, and processes of all organizations and businesses in the Rochester community. And our members are comprised of both for-profit, nonprofit, and public entities that believe in that commitment to, again, a place where we have progress, cooperation, quality have meaning. And I'm very pleased tonight to introduce our guest speaker tonight, who comes to us from MIT. And I think, again, his commitment to quality in education will have many lessons, whether you're running a business, whether you yourself are a practitioner or a professor or involved in the education space. Krishna Rajagopal is MIT's Dean for Digital Learning. He leads efforts to empower and catalyze the faculty at MIT to use digital technology to augment and transform how they teach students at MIT and how they adopt open online courses and other types of software to really connect with learners all around the world. He is also the William A.M. Burden Professor of Physics. And after growing up right across Lake Ontario in Toronto from Rochester, Professor did his undergraduate work at Queen's in Kingston, Canada, and he obtained his doctorate at Princeton University in 1993 and spent 3 years at Harvard as a junior fellow. He then spent 1 year at Caltech before coming to MIT in 1997, and he has since become the associate head of the Department of Physics and has served as the chair of the MIT faculty from 2015 to 2017 and has been MIT's dean for digital learning since 2017. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Krishna Rajagopal and to hear more on his topic tonight, which again is using digital delivery to enhance the magic of MIT and open learning. And just a few ground rules too. Please feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along. Krishna has prepared about 15 minutes or so of prepared remarks, but we really encourage you to put questions right into the chat or maybe raise your hand so we can make sure we field your questions once he gets through his prepared remarks. But thanks for attending.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Jim. And yeah, I grew up in Greater Rochester, as we already discussed that before the opening, just across the lake in Toronto. It's a pleasure to be back. I've driven across I-90 many times. Combination of living now in Boston and when I was a grad student in being in Princeton. So I'm actually going to stand the original topic a little bit on its head, in that you'll see, in a sense, I want to talk about the excellence of a residential education and how digital delivery and online tools can contribute to that. So at MIT, we are fundamentally a residential university. We're very proud of the education that we offer on our campus in 02139, Cambridge, Massachusetts. But then starting on March the 30th, 2020, all of us were at home. Students were learning remotely, faculty were teaching remotely, and staff and faculty were working remotely. We only had 2 weeks to prepare for that. That was a crazy time, and I'm sure it was crazy in all of your lives also. So we got through the spring in some way, but then that spring of 2020, but then for the entire past academic year, last fall and the most recent spring, almost all of our undergrad teaching and learning was done remotely, even though some fraction of our students were actually on campus. Much of the teaching was actually done remotely, and almost all of the faculty were actually largely at home. So if I was meeting with you, say 6 months ago, the natural topic would have been, how the heck do we do this? How did we manage to sort of turn the battleship? MIT people have done things in a certain way for a long time, and we were going this way, and now we had to go that way. How did we pivot to remote learning in 2 weeks? How did we get through the spring of 2020? What did we do when we had time to think about it and prepare over the summer? How did we teach this kind of class? How did we teach that kind of class? You can ask me questions like that at the end, but because we're sort of, I hope, through that, I wanted to focus my own remarks in a slightly different direction, which is to look ahead. Like many of us here now, we are starting to ask, how are we going to benefit from this past 16 months of experience as we return to in-person teaching and in-person learning with students and faculty on our campus, 02139, Cambridge, Massachusetts, this fall and beyond. So I'll weave in a lot about what we did, but I'm going to try to frame this as by looking ahead. What have we learned, and how will it benefit us in trying to improve the education that we offer on our campus in the future? And I want to start with two somewhat intangible, but in my opinion, very important points. The first one is that in my 24 years at MIT, there has never been a year when there's been more focus on pedagogy, on how to teach. Normally, I'm ashamed to admit that most faculty, when they get ready to teach their course, of course, they have to think about the content, but in terms of the teaching methods and how to teach, they just do it the same way they did last year. And they don't think about that part. They just do things the same way they did before. And I think GRQC will agree that's not a recipe for excellence. You get excellence in some ways, but it's not the best. It's much better if you actually think about how you're doing what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing, and really go back to first principles. And some people do that, but this past year, everyone had to do that. When all of a sudden doing it the way you did last year was impossible and unavailable, everyone had to go back to first principles and ask not just what material do I want to cover, which is the easy question, but what are my learning goals for my students? What do I hope that they learn? How can I teach in a way that they will learn the skills and the content, but the skills, the modes of thinking that I'm hoping that they will learn? There's been more focus on this in the past year than in any other year of my career. And just to give you one example, starting back in April of 2020, MIT has had what we locally call the 8 a.m. call. The Zoom meeting for the entire spring of 2020, it was basically Monday through Friday. In fact, I think there were a few times when we had it even on a weekend day as we were dealing with the crises of that spring. It's been 2 or 3 times a week for the entire succeeding year. And the 8 a.m. call, these days, it's about almost 200 people. It's the extended leadership of MIT. It's not just the senior leadership. It's not just the deans. It's all the department heads. It's all associate department heads. It's all committee chairs. It's the leaders of all of the major offices at MIT. There's leaders of the student government, both undergrad and graduate. It's the extended leadership of the institution. The MIT is, if you include faculty, staff, and students, it's about 25,000 people, 1,000 faculty, 11,000 students, and about 15,000 staff. And this extended leadership, we would spend an entire hour with 2 faculty coming in and talking about how they were teaching and how it was going, and a discussion back and forth, what's working and why. That's inconceivable in normal times, to have the entire leadership of MIT. And we did that, I don't remember how many days we did that, but we did that probably over a year, we did that a dozen different days for an hour at 8 a.m. on the 8 a.m. call. Inconceivable in normal times. And so many department faculty meetings were focused on teaching. How are we doing? How do we do this? What's working, what's not? That focus will pay off. That going back to first principles will pay off. As we return to normal, people won't just do what they always did. People will be much more willing to try new things because we were all forced to. So that's sort of my first answer. Second answer comes to the magic of MIT. So as a residential university, we're proud of the education we offer, as I said. And we often speak about this phrase, magic of MIT, I've heard for 20 years. But what does it actually mean? Most of the time, I think nobody actually asks what. We just say magic of MIT, but we don't ask ourselves, what do we mean? This past year, we had to ask ourselves, well, what do we mean? And in effect, the question we were asking is, why do students actually come to 02139? Why do they come to campus? This year, we lost a lot of the magic, and we had to struggle to keep as much as we could. And so this question of what is the magic of MIT, in GRQC language, another way of phrasing it is, what makes a residential education at MIT excellent? And our answer is the magic of MIT, but we never really thought about what that means, or at least far too few people did. And so again, a lot of focus this past year on what is it that we've missed? What is the value to students and to faculty actually of being co-present together on campus? And I think the magic comes from unscripted engagement, and unscripted engagement of 100 different kinds. And I'm talking about engagement as much, probably more so, between student and student, but also between student and teacher. All of which is to say, it's not about the lecture. In these days, you don't come to MIT for the lectures, because you can watch the lectures online from anywhere in the world. And in fact, our students like watching lectures on video. They tell us they like to watch us on video. The key is they know us already. They can see us and engage with us, but they like watching lectures on video because they can rewind and fast forward and watch it at any time. So it's not the lecture. It's more the Q&A after the lecture than it is the lecture. And that's part of why I wanted to make this meeting Q&A dominated. It could be the office hours. That's part of the magic. It's in a class, a smaller class, 5 people, 10 people, 15 people sitting around a table for a class where you have a discussion that's bouncing around all around the room. That's part of the magic, where the teacher is more asking questions than answering them. It's students working together. That's a big part of the magic of MIT. We gather an amazing group of students and they work together. They work together on their problem sets till late into the night in their dorm. They work on projects. Could be a project that takes 2 weeks, could be a project that takes 2 years. Well, that's exaggerating. 1 semester. They work on labs together. They work on practicing to the symphony music performance, or the Balinese drumming performance. It's the undergrad research experiences. 98 or 99% of our students do undergraduate research while at MIT. That's a big part of the magic. It's the maker spaces, building stuff with your hands. It's the practice and performance, as I said. It's the work you do in labs, working together with your peers. So this is the magic, and this is what all of us are itching to get back to doing. Yes, we tried to compensate, and to some degree, we found ways of doing some of these things in partial ways, but we've been missing it. And I'm here, by the way, I'm only talking about the educational components. There's a whole lot of the magic also that those of you who are MIT alumni will remember that comes from living in dorms and experiencing life at MIT. That's important too, but I'll leave that for another day. So the question for tonight and for us for the coming year, probably beyond this year, is how can we use what we've all learned this past year doing this thing called Zoom and learned about digital delivery. How can we use this to make more magic? And the magic comes from that in-person unscripted engagement. Nobody wants to teach like this ever again. It's not as good as the full MIT experience. But then again, nobody wants to go back to the way we were before either, because we have learned things and we can do, the new normal can be better than the old normal. So how do we integrate aspects of what we've learned into what we do in ways that create more time for engagement, create more time for sort of those moments when you're bouncing ideas off of someone and something creative and new emerges, you make a discovery, you invent something, you find the solution to a problem. So, and how will this change MIT? How will it change our campus? These are actually very big questions. They won't be answered easily or quickly. But I think the focus on this kind of question is going to make MIT better. And, you know, look, I don't work with any of you in any of your companies, but I think that, and each of you can translate everything I just said into the context of your company. I don't think work is going to be the same as it was before. I also don't think anyone loves the idea of continuing just on Zoom. So what will the merger be in your workplace? You can, I'm sure that many of you are thinking about that already. So I'm going to give you 3 tiny little examples, which I think are crystal clear. And then I'll come back to the big question, which I don't think is clear, the answer to which is not yet clear. So here's 3 little answers to little pieces. First, just a second. First of all, I guarantee you we're going to continue using Zoom to bring in guest speakers. It is a lot easier to bring an alum in to speak to a class for half an hour by Zoom than to bring them in, even if they're in, even if they work in a biotech in Cambridge. If they work in a biotech in Cambridge, they have to get from wherever their biotech is into your classroom and back. But just imagine if we tried to bring an alum from Rochester. It's much, much easier to do, to bring in an expert or an alum who is an expert, to bring in guest speakers. And that's good for MIT's students because, you know, it's true you won't get the full engagement that comes with working together late into the night with your peers, that kind of engagement. But our students are getting to meet experts by Zoom whom they would otherwise never have seen at all. And so meeting them by Zoom is better than not meeting them at all. So that will certainly continue. I'll say we had one class this past fall, I think, where they had 32 guest speakers in one semester. Frankly, I think that's excessive, although it worked very well for that class. They had panels of experts. But I think that this will be a part of an MIT education forever. A second sort of small example is Zoom office hours. So all of you went to college, I'm guessing, you imagine, you know what office hours are. I'm sitting in my office in the physics department of MIT, group of students, 2 students, 3 students come to my office hours. We found that more students came to office hours by Zoom. Now, why is that? It's an interesting question, actually. Is it because it's easier to walk into a Zoom than to cross the threshold and enter my office? Is that intimidating in some way? Well, then we have to fix that problem. I don't want it to be intimidating. But there's also just the logistics. To walk across campus takes time, and to go into a Zoom room is quick. It's seems some ways more informal. A lot of office hours, the faculty member was at home and their cat was walking through the screen, and you were joining people in their living room. So we have to continue with Zoom office hours to keep more people coming as before. But then again, everyone also said that Zoom office hours were less engaging. You never had that real in-person connection with the faculty member in a Zoom office hour. So we have to do in-person office hours also. So we need a mix. Pretty easy example, but we will definitely need a mix of in-person office hours and Zoom. And then the third, I think, straightforward one, which I'll give you, What about chat? So you're all using Zoom chat already. Um, um, in our classes, Zoom chat has really been excellent, actually. In large classes with 100 students, there's usually a TA watching the chat. And just as David later is going to pick out good questions from the chat, that TA once every 10, 15 minutes or so will stop the lecture and say, hey, there's 3 really good questions in the chat. And that's been excellent. The students say it's good. The faculty say it's good. That's been excellent. And sometimes actually students put questions in the Zoom chat and other students answer them before the TA even stops the class. So great. But the only way of doing this when we're back in person is to use a device like this. Okay, it's actually very easy. The technology is straightforward. You set up a Slack channel. You can have all your students on the Slack channel, and you can work just like Zoom chat. The problem is that just made it legitimate for a student in your class to be doing this during the class, because they're on their device and they might be actually asking a great question on the Zoom chat, the equivalent of Zoom chat, but then again, they might be texting their friend. And so it's actually not clear to me actually whether recreating Zoom chat in an in-person classroom is a good or a bad thing, but it's going to be experimented with. Many people are going to try. We'll see how it goes. That's 3 easy ones. Now let me come to sort of the fourth one, which I think is much bigger and much more challenging and much more interesting, and not yet clear how it's going to play out. So our students, if we listened to our students and they told us what they valued during the pandemic, they valued any and all forms of engagement. And what did they say they didn't like? They disliked long, uninterrupted lectures with huge slide decks, no engagement, 1 hour, no interruption, big slide deck, PowerPoint. They hated that. So we should listen to that. And the question is, what message do we draw? There's no question we should listen to that. And frankly, anyone who pays attention to teaching and learning and thinks seriously about it already knew this. But everyone's now heard it. So one lesson is to teach better. And I think because you have to really, really, really work to engage through Zoom and to keep people's attention, one answer is just to teach better, but maybe a better answer is to get rid of lecture altogether. So a lot of people are asking, can we either reduce the number of lectures or get rid of them altogether? Given what we've learned, not about this kind of online conversation like we're about to have, but about asynchronous, effective asynchronous digital delivery, which I'll talk a little more about in a minute. So imagine for a second, take a lecture, videotape it, break it up into 5-10 minute segments, put those 5-10 minute segments online. That's the simplest way of thinking about asynchronous delivery. Given that we can replace lecture with asynchronous delivery, and we can do better than what I just said, but I'll come to that. What should we do with the in-person time in class? Any professor who says, oh, maybe I can just replace lecture by video and then I go on vacation. No, and that's not what you're hearing at MIT. That you might hear that somewhere, I don't know, but that's basically would be us shooting ourselves in the foot as an institution. The right way to think about this is the students come to us to MIT for the magic. How can we create more magic? If we replace lecture by something they do on their own time, what can we do together? Well, we can work on problem solving together. We can have groups of people working together on problems with faculty and TAs circulating and bouncing questions off of groups that are wrestling with problems together. We can do more projects. We can do more student presentations. We can do more case studies. We can do more discussion with an active Q&A component. We can do mini lectures, but instead of trying to communicate all the material, put most of it online, most of the sort of passive transfer of content, put it online, but think about how to spark curiosity in person. What are the demonstrations to do? What are the ways of inspiring your students? Do that in person. As you start to think about this, this has implications for our campus, by the way, the physical space. You can't do what I just said in a lecture theater. think back to undergrad days, large lecture theater, sloped room, all the chairs bolted in place. You can't do what I just said in that room. We have plenty of rooms like that, but we need more flexible classrooms in which the seats are not fixed to the ground, the tables are not fixed to the ground. Think about breakout rooms in Zoom and imagine doing breakout rooms in a classroom. What would it mean? It would say, gather in groups of 9 and spend the next 10 minutes debating the following question. So you need the chairs to move so that you can clump together in groups of 9. Okay, now you've done that. Now everyone, eyes back up here. I've got, I'm gonna discuss, so you need to be able to move the chairs around to reconfigure the room for small groups or for everybody looking towards the front. That kind of flexible classroom we have at MIT, certainly, but we have far too few of them for the teaching of the future. So we need to rethink classrooms to have classrooms that allow us to create magic together. Those 7 to 8 minute video segments, you need something in between them. So take a lecture, break it into 7 to 8 minute segments, and in between you put online problems. Not hard ones, but just an are you paying attention, answer a question, re-engage, refocus, get your attention back, and then go on to the next video segment. We call that a sequence. We've gotten very good at making online sequences because that's how we build our MITx courses that we share with the world online. So we at MIT already knew how to do this, but it was only about 200 faculty that had ever done this, and we're more than 1,000 faculty. So when the pandemic hit, we had the advantage of having 200 faculty who actually knew already how to create really good online content. And one of the really good things for us was that because MIT is so decentralized, my office as Dean for Digital Learning, we actually have a relatively small staff. We don't do everything for the faculty in my office. In terms of what we've done for the last 10 years, building online materials, building online courses that run on for the world, we have sort of colonized department by department and planted expertise. There's several key faculty and 2 staff in the physics department, in the math department, mechanical engineering department, electrical engineering, computer science, etc. So one of the things that turned out to be really fortunate for MIT when the pandemic hit, 80% of the faculty were panicked. But in every department, there were people who had an idea for how to do this. And that really, really helped. And now that we're through it and on the other side, 100% of the people are thinking and talking along the lines of, well, hang on a second, maybe we can do something better with our time together than lecture. Many, many more people are thinking along the lines of what is the best way of using the in-person time that is so valuable and which is why people come to MIT in the first place? How do we create more magic? I should also mention, by the way, in terms of those online courses that we share with the world, in building them, we've developed more and more sophisticated online problems, which help students to learn the way an MIT problem set does. And the nice secret, not so secret, is that nowadays, if you're taking intro physics, for those of you who went to MIT 801 and 802, about half your homework is actually done online. And it's the identical interactive online problems that we have in our online courses that anyone in the world can take. So there's this interplay that is developed where I will not tell you that you can get an MIT education from anywhere in the world just from MITx online. It's not true. That's just false because the magic is missing. Okay, the magic comes from the unscripted in-person engagement that only happens in 02139. But we can share in a genuine way elements drawn from an MIT education. The same elements that we will put online because our students would rather watch video segments than uninterrupted lecture, we can share with the world. And so the way I think about what we do with MITx is that we're sharing elements of an MIT education. It's MIT quality. It's the same homework problems that MIT students do. That we can share broadly with the world, but everybody has to create their own magic. We're not sharing the magic part. Everybody has to create their own magic. And whether that's, if you're a student at some other university or other college in some other city or country, or whether you're just an independent learner talking to your friend, in some way you have to create that unscripted engagement of your own. We can't share that. The magic of MIT resides on campus. And what we're all thinking about now is how to, as we get back together in person, how to create more of it. And I'm going to stop with that and take questions. David, I'll start reading the chat, but you might want to pick some for me.
I've been taking lots of notes and just trying to capture some of your key themes and then pick questions that fit into some of the great themes you've laid out. One of them I think is just like, how does the magic get made? And I think one of the questions, I'm going to start with one that was around, kind of a models. Brian, I know you have two questions, so I'll get to your second one. But one of the first ones he asked, and you answered some of the aspects of it, he asked, in most disciplines, there are core undergraduate courses covering material across most universities. So would learning be improved by moving to a blended teaching model where, one, you have a consortium that provides the highest quality of online lectures, combined with B, freeing faculty at each university to lead complementary in-class participatory learning activities? So would that be one model that could help make more time for magic, as you put it?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting idea. And I think some component of some element, who asked me the question, by the way? Who was that?
Brian Morella, the class of 78.
Yep. Okay. His camera's not on, which he apologized for already. Otherwise, I was going to make eye contact with the right Zoom square. So Brian, we already see a little bit of that. I'll give you one example. So we've built two of our most popular MITx courses, our Intro to Computer Science online courses. There's a community college in California, San Jose City College, that uses them in their curriculum. But they don't just say, okay, go take the course on edX. They have built a curriculum which includes on-ramps for their students, because their students don't come in with the same preparation that students come to MIT with. That includes extra tutorials, extra support, academic support. It's also followed by a teaching material, which I think they got from Linux, either Linux or Microsoft, I forget. There's a course from Berkeley. There's a course that they built themselves. There's internships. So they basically created a program for their community college students, which they call TechNest. And included in TechNest is two of our online courses. And I think that's great. I wish that there were more examples like that to point to. I could point to other examples, but there's nowhere near enough. The word hybrid, by the way, is used in so many different ways. The one thing I will say that I don't like the idea of, and this is also called hybrid, but it's a different use of the word hybrid, is maybe we could have me in the classroom teaching 20 students who are there in the classroom, and then there's these giant screens where there's another 50 students who are all the way around the world, and I can teach to the screens and to the class at the same time. That is very, very difficult to do. It's almost always makes the experience worse for the students in the classroom that the teacher is distracted by the screens. And for the students on the screens, it would be better if we just had a Zoom meeting like this. And for the teacher, it drives you crazy. So
that's a great point. We actually had a question from Jean Ellison. I just want to kind of chime in here. She asked, will you do any hybrid teaching with some students off campus who are not able to attend in person? So it kind of hits on one of her questions that she asked, it sounds like.
Yeah, Jean, where are you, Jean? Let me find you. There you are.
I'm here. I mean, ironically, I part of my course at MIT was delivered in that method.
Yeah, and so if you get really good at it, maybe you can do it. But we are trying to get everyone back, even our international students. The visa processes seem to be going pretty well. If you look at how many visas have been issued by this point in the year, it's actually like a normal year this year. It's not like last year. So we're trying to get our students back. Everyone who has been not able to get a vaccine in their home country will be offered a vaccine the day they arrive. So the goal at the moment is to not need to do that. We'll have to see how we actually end up doing, but certainly, like, let's do it this way. So if you're an incoming student from an international student and you are simply unable to get to MIT by middle of the semester, MIT has decided not to say, oh, you can participate via hybrid teaching. MIT has decided to say you'll have to defer your arrival by 1 semester and arrive a semester late. So we're really trying to prioritize bringing students back to campus.
Krishna, I know you're not able to. I'm going to try to touch on a few individuals' questions here. Brian asked, I think, a question relevant to this. Jim, and maybe one. Brian asked a second one as well. It really goes to some of this, some of the news that's been out there. I know you're not able to comment on specifically maybe the view of faculty or the transaction that happened recently. I'm going to try to pull out some of the key questions I think you can answer based on our pre-calls we've done. Is what was learned, I guess, by the 20 years of experimentation from all the platforms you use? And then I think back to Jim Boyd's question to kind of build on that, maybe what are some of the tools and techniques that help you make good quality online education? I know you're very passionate about in-person, that's where the magic happens, but to make that time, us as quality professionals, we want to make less waste. We don't want to have it just be boring. So what are some of the things you learned over that 20 years? And then again, to piggyback on that Jim Boyd's question, tools, techniques, lessons that others can maybe adapt, because you talked about, I think it was like 20% of your staff knew how to do this, and the other 80% didn't. Pareto principle. Right.
Okay. So first of all, Brian, the sale of edX was not a surprise to me. I knew it was coming, which I think should be obvious to you. I will say, as I've said in many MIT audiences, I myself have very serious and continuing concerns about the decision that MIT has made in going ahead with this sale. And it's very controversial on campus among the faculty right now. There's a certain faculty conversation that I would describe as right now at about the sort of at a rolling boil. It's hotter than a simmer. And I'd rather not take the time of this group to try to say more than that, just to say that there's a lot of concern. If you are sufficiently interested to want to speak with me privately about it, send me an email and we could talk further if that's of sufficient interest to you. But yes, it's controversial. Yes, I have concerns myself also, but I'd rather not go further down that path. David, your question, the way you pivoted the question, I'm happy with. So let me first of all talk about 20 years versus 10 years versus today. So for 20 years, what we've been doing for 20 years is OpenCourseWare. And we're continuing. OpenCourseWare is one of the great things about MIT. And the philosophy of OpenCourseWare from the faculty point of view is you teach your course the same as you always do. No change to your teaching, just teach your course at MIT. Now it's the end of the semester. What are the artifacts of your teaching? Okay. And OpenCourseWare is there to allow you to share the artifacts of your teaching as you did it, to share those artifacts openly with the world for the world to use any way they want. So 20 years ago, those artifacts were largely paper. And so they turned into PDFs. So you would share your homework assignment, you would share your reading list, you would share your syllabus, you would share your lecture notes. Really, for the 15 years, we've been sharing video also. So OpenCourseWare now, ocw.mit.edu, we get about 2 million visits per month on the website. Well over 200 million visitors in 20 years. So, sorry, well over 200 million visitors in 20 years. But maybe the most impressive stat is that we have a YouTube channel where, so all of our videos, all the videos you can watch either on the OCW site or on YouTube. And we are now the largest .edu channel on YouTube. We have more than 3 million subscribers. And so in fact, we get much of our traffic to the website actually comes to us from YouTube. But that sort of, we have 20 years, and in fact, I would say we have 100 years of a spirit, a philosophy, a sense of our values as sharing with the world. But if you think about what I just said did not change how anybody taught at all, right? It was not about change how you teach to make a better offering for the world. No, OCW is teach at MIT the way you've always taught at MIT, the way you want to. No change to how you teach, but then you can share your materials, including nowadays video. So starting 10 years ago with MITx, MITx is purpose-built materials for the online medium. And so really it's 10 years of history. The interplay between how do you teach online and then how does that help you teach better on campus, that's 10 years old, not 20. And that's what I said, whatever I said, about 200 faculty having participated. And there's two big parts to it. One is creating better video. And frankly, I think that we are good at video, but we're nowhere near the best. We're one of 100 educational institutions that know how to make good video. I don't think it's our claim to fame, although I'm very proud of our video teams. And certainly our faculty have learned that if you make an OCW video where you just tape a lecture for 50 minutes and put that on the line, that's nowhere near as good as 7 to 8 minute segments with problems interspersed. People are using animation, people are using cartoons, but I don't think, you know, we're not the world leader in educational video. Where I think we've really made a difference is online problems. We have a lot of people who've been in a lot of creative ways develop new problem types. So multiple choice, that's passé. Multiple choice is fine if all you want to do is you've watched a 7-minute video segment. Now you want the student to take a break and to sort of re-engage and to focus. So you give them a multiple choice question like, you know, basically, where are you paying attention? Is the answer A, B, C, or D? That's fine. That works for that. But if you want to recreate the experience of an MIT student doing a problem set where they wrestle with something challenging, that's not multiple choice. And so we now have problem types where the answer you enter is a complex formula whose correctness is evaluated. We have problem types where actually drag and drop is quite a powerful one. If you want to check to see whether a student really understands something like a theorem or a proof, you give them the skeleton of it, and then you give them 20 or 30 words or symbols, and they have to drag and drop them into the right place. And if you have sort of 20 or 30 elements and about 10 holes, there's basically an infinite number of wrong answers. And so it's actually quite a good way of seeing whether a student can understand the logic of something. We have problems where what the student has to do is sketch a graph. So suppose that the correct solution is a curve that looks like this. I'll do it with the tip of my finger. It looks like that. So you sketch that, and you'll get it correct if you have a maximum, and then an inflection point, and then a minimum, and if it goes up on this side and it goes down on that side. So we have now problem types where what is checked is the qualitative correctness of a curve that you've sketched. I could give any more examples. And so I think where we've invested a lot in the past 9 years is more and more sophisticated, interactive, auto-graded online problems, which we use for MIT students' homework and in our online courses. And I will say that we would never, in normal times, we never do this for an exam. But the reason you do this for homework is actually pedagogically interesting. So I don't know how many of you took science and engineering classes when you were in college, regardless of where you were in college. The weekly problem set is the standard thing in most science and engineering classes. And if you think about it, like in my day at Queen's University across the lake from you, I would do my weekly problem set in each of my physics or math classes. I would hand it in. And then about 10 days later, I would get it back. And some poor sucker had graded it. And they put some red X's on it. They put some red check marks on it. And I got, 6.8 out of 10 or whatever I got. And okay, now you go ask my professor, why did you do this? Why did you have what was the purpose of the problem set? Oh, it's not for evaluation because I know the students are talking with each other, which is great. It's to help them learn. So maybe I learned by doing it, but I certainly didn't learn from the grading of it, because when I get that thing back 10 days later, I'm not paying attention anymore because I worked on it 10 days ago. By now I'm on the problem set after next. It goes into the stack and I never look at it again, except maybe if I'm very diligent, I look at it before the exam. Now, when you're doing your homework, it's 2 a.m. You've done your problem, you think you know the answer, you type it into the MITx. We have a private copy of the MITx platform. You type it in and you get a green check, and that's like this, yes. Then you do the next one, you get another green check, yes. Then you get a red X, and it's 2:30 in the morning, you get a red X. If you're a normal person, you don't like the red X, you want a green check, and you do something at that moment. Maybe you talk with a friend, maybe you read the book, maybe you go back and watch the video, maybe you find your little slip, your typo, well, that's the least interesting case. It's good if you talk to a friend. It's good if you read the book. It's good if you watch the video. You just learned something, and you learned something when you were motivated, because you just got a red X. What did I do wrong? I have to get this right. So you're motivated and you actually learn something. So it's very interesting. When you poll the faculty, they say we love these interactive online problems as a part of homework because our students are learning more and they're doing better on the exams. And when you poll the students, they say, oh, we love it because we get more points on our homework, because they give us 3 attempts, so we get more points on our homework. So the students are doing it for the points and the endorphin rush, but they're actually learning more.
To the point on what students love, Terry Callahan asked a really good question. We've spent a lot of time sort of talking about what works well online. He asked the question, have you asked them conversely how they recommend using FaceTime with instructors in order to be most valuable to them?
So we should, but we did not ask that last year, because the normal way that you do teaching evaluations is you ask for an evaluation of what you actually did. And since last year there was almost nothing in person, we didn't ask that question. Frankly, I think it's quite clear that the reason our students want to come back to campus, first and foremost, is to spend time with their peers. So if you just ask, what do you want to do in person? It's going to the first answers will all be about whether it's life in the dorm, whether it's the sports teams, whether it's the parties, whether it's doing our homework together, doing our problem sets together, working on projects together. It's going to be about the peer-to-peer interaction. What will be really interesting, actually, to start asking our students in the coming years, what are the best ways, what is their view of the best ways of creating that faculty to student interaction, which they all say that they want, but I will say, I don't think it's going to be the first thing. The faculty at MIT have to get over the fact that the reason the students are itching to come back is actually the other students.
To that end, Krishna, you've talked a lot about just the massive impact all of this has. And just listening to you talk about this, I've not ever been in the academic space. I used to be in marketing and tech stacks, basically, you're describing. But one of the things I think I'm just trying to ask the leadership question, because I think we've spent a lot of time in GRQC with our members talking about strategic planning, the disruption of strategic planning. So I'm going to combine 2 questions for sake of time, and I hope I don't mess up the questions by doing so. But one person asked, to what extent was MIT able to reserve the magic of MIT during COVID when the campus was shut down? And someone else asked the question.
So reserve or preserve?
Preserve, yep.
Yeah.
And then the other question I think is related somewhat from a management leadership standpoint is, will the extended leadership team 8 a.m. calls continue as a means to innovate? So I'm trying to combine those 2 questions. I know that was integral to maintain, it sounds like, during COVID, but also could that be a mechanism to foster some of the change management that you likely foresee coming to implement some of the things you've talked about?
Yeah, so the answer is to the second one is definitely yes, although it will not be weekly. It will not be weekly. That 8 a.m. call is continuing. In fact, we had one on Friday last week, and I expect we have another one Friday this coming week. Right now, probably for the next few weeks in the run-up to the coming year, I think it probably will be weekly, but during the semester, it'll be more episodic. But from a management theory point of view, one of the very interesting things about that call is that it was neither completely bottom up nor completely top down. I don't know if you call deans middle managers, but let me explain. So
not to their faces.
Yeah, so in normal times, the only time the whole of MIT or the whole of its leadership gathers, it's usually the president or the provost who's going to be speaking. And this was not that at all. It wasn't completely bottom up either. in many ways, what happened when the pandemic hit is that the department heads, the deans, the chair of this committee, or the person who leads IS&T, the IT leadership, the student support leadership, but basically all the people who lead parts of MIT, basically a crisis hit in March of 2020, and everybody said, so we need a group of people working on the teaching and learning. So it was all stovepipe barriers were gone. The people who led parts of MIT were just working with each other to get stuff done, because that was the only way we could possibly be ready for March the 30th. And this spirit of no stovepipes, if you need a sort of, yes, there's this org chart, but if the right way to get something done is the org chart looks like this, but it's these two people just roll up their sleeves and work together. That was the spirit, and that has continued. And in many ways, the ADM call, it's dominated by people at my level. So I don't know, the word dean at MIT means two below the president. All deans report to somebody who reports to the president. And the ADM call is, the speakers are usually either my level or one below. So if you think of the org chart. And that has worked really well. Now nobody says that the very big decisions at MIT are going to be made by a gathering of 180 people on Zoom. That won't work. You do need a hierarchy, and you do need a president. But in terms of communication, sharing best practices, working together, this has actually worked really, really well. And somebody should study it from the point of view of sort of, management theory, organizational theory of how organizations work. It's actually worked really well. What was the first question, David?
The first question was just around the impact of COVID, and was the magic lost? Or to what extent was MIT able to reserve? I think it's supposed to be preserve the magic of MIT during COVID.
So we lost a lot. We did, not so much in the spring, but in the fall and in the most recent spring, we both lost a lot and preserved a lot. I think I'm trying to think how to summarize. Well, maybe I should answer in terms of my research life. I haven't talked about research. We've been talking about teaching, but so I have several PhD students, and I have several postdocs, and I have collaborators around the world in my theoretical physics research life. And I think we've actually kept going quite well. And I have a new PhD student whom I started working with during the pandemic. But what I see much less of is real creativity, a real spark that starts something in a completely new direction. I see a very productive and a lot of hard work, but less creativity, and that's in my research life. And I think it's similar, which is to say, in spring of 2020, we were mediocre, and our students were incredibly grateful for what we delivered, because it was very, very tough for everybody that spring. But I won't say we did well. I think by this past year, we were doing okay. But I don't think we're doing MIT quality, but I think we're doing okay. And I think our students have been very tolerant of the faculty and the challenges the faculty have faced. They've had teachers who have had, their baby crying and they have to go take care of the baby. And you can make up lots of other examples. And the faculty have been very, very tolerant of the students. It's been a very stressful time for many students. Many students don't have the kind of setup at home that is conducive to real focus on your work. And I think the sort of community has held together well, and people have been empathetic. It has not been so there's many positives, but I don't think it's been what we aspire to as MIT.
I want to shift to and Krishna, I want to be respectful of your time. We are kind of at our time that we advertised here, but if we did about 2 more questions, we'd probably go another 15 minutes just based on the conversation we're having. Would that be okay with you? And
I can certainly go 15 minutes more. No problem at all.
Okay, Great. I want to just ask GK, you asked a philosophical question, which I think is very timely. We're having a national debate about student debt. I'm very proud to say I'll be done my undergraduate debt next year, 15 years later, thank God. So the question is, philosophically, in a larger context, do you assess that the new robust virtual education approach has democratized quality education, made it more accessible and affordable and convenient? Sure, some magic is lost, but reach has increased dramatically. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. GK, where were you in undergrad?
Oh, GK, you're on mute. Just
Sorry, I'm sorry. I got my doctoral degree, Rajagopal. I got from Sloan School my degree,
Okay.
PhD.
Yeah.
But I'm an education counselor, so I now kind of integrate.
Yeah. So one of the things we're proud of at MIT is the low level of debt for our undergrads. And I'm not speaking here about Sloan MBA or I'm not speaking here about every program at MIT, but across our entire undergrad program, I don't have the current numbers at my fingertips, but something like only 20%, only a quarter of our students have any debt, and those who come out with debt, the average debt load is like $15,000 or something along those lines. So we are very generous with our financial aid, like many of our peers, and undergrad admission is need blind and financial aid is need based, and we try to meet the needs of our undergrads. One of the things I'll say, looking at it from the other side, is if you look at MIT's operating budget and ask what fraction of it comes from undergrad tuition, it's about 5%. But that's not the right way to look at it, because if you look at what fraction of MIT's budget comes from gifts from alumni and the endowment, which is the return on the investment from the investment of past gifts. So the combination of return on the payout from the endowment and expendable gifts, so gifts that are not put into the endowment but that are spent per the wishes of the supporter, those two together are close to 50% of our, it's 40 something percent of our operating budget. So 5% for undergrad tuition, 40 something percent for gifts and the return on gifts from our alumni. So in many ways, in thinking about an undergrad education at MIT, tuition is important. 5% is nothing to be sneezed at, and but tuition is in many ways the much smaller fraction of how our students contribute to their education and those of students in the future. But this model that I just described, would be the same. The numbers may be different, but it will be the same for a lot of the top universities. But it doesn't work that way for a large fraction of the universities in the country, which are much more tuition dependent, and where debt is a bigger issue. So now, if you ask in terms of has MITx democratized education, and has edX democratized education, that you have to take that apart and look at who has learned from MITx. MITx has not reached the 30-something-year-old who works at Walmart and who missed out on education up to age 30. It has not reached that person. Who MITx has reached are people who benefited from have had some level of education and then are adding more. It's certainly true that with MITx, we are reaching hundreds of thousands, maybe depending on which course, even millions of people who would never have had the opportunity to learn from the materials that we offer. That's true. And in that sense, we're democratizing access. It's not true. It's not true to say that we are creating equity. That would be an overstatement. And so in many ways, as I think about this, we need that community college that I talked about in California or other community colleges to be making online materials of their own. Because Sam, you said you teach at a community college. I won't speak about yours, but San Jose City College they have a population of students who are their students whom they know how to teach. And we don't know how to teach that population. We never have. And so we need an ecosystem where there are materials at multiple levels that people can use to sort of, depending on where they're starting and what their context is, and build up. I don't think we're there yet. I'm not sure if I've answered your full question, GK, but those are some thoughts.
Thank you.
Excellent. I'm just going to call out a few things kind of as comments and then go to one last question. It was hard to choose. I just want to call out Dr. Stahl. I won't pose it as a question, but I just want to put it out there for the group. I don't know, Dr. Stahl, if you want to put your email in the chat for everyone.
Hello?
He just talked about access to good information, direct engagement for the Medicare and Medicaid population, and would like to know if anyone's working on that in the Office of Digital Learning. And if anyone wants to discuss that in greater detail offline, please reach out to him. So that was one topic. Yep.
So we have a group at MIT called the Age Lab, which we should figure out how to connect you to, Rob. But what I will say about MITx is that we have high school students who are, we have high school students and we have people who are well past 65. If you look at the age distribution of MITx learners, it's very broad. If there's a peak, it's in the so let's say mid to late 20s, but it's more broad than it is peaked. We have about 75% of our learners are from outside the United States, 25% in the United States. And yes, there is a staggering need for access to good information. But the preventive health side, I'm afraid I have nothing to say, but I would connect you to Age Lab, but I don't know all that much about what Age Lab would have to say about that.
Okay, yeah, I'll put my email in there, and I'm just looking to try and harness the magic and authority of MIT to potentially help lots of people.
Okay. Age Lab is what I think of immediately, but I'm not sure specifically. I'll connect you if you send me an email.
Okay, I'll do that. Thanks.
Susan, can I do this? Susan's question about lab experience.
I was just going to say, you mentioned lab, and I said that was a great segue. So thanks for being on the same wavelength. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so when we pivoted, there were basically the kinds of classes that were the most challenging were lab classes, project classes, and performance classes. And it actually turned out that the performance classes were the most difficult to figure out how to do online. The MIT Symphony actually continued online, but it was not like a symphony. I think it was a good community building exercise, and they made digital music, but it was not like a symphony. So now what about labs and projects? So I'll give you a couple of examples. So you mentioned neurophysiology. So that is in course 9. That's actually a case where I know the answer. So it was March of 2020. Everyone knew that everyone's going to be heading home. But what course 9 did for their major neurophysiology lab is they had all the TAs go in. It was one of the last few days before everybody left. And just with like cell phone cameras, just crude videotaping, they had the TAs do the experiments and videotape. And so it was a combination of your TA showing you what she or he did, plus they also found video online of sort of some of the great historic experiments. So what they did in that class, it's not like the real thing, but they basically made use of the combination of sort of, outstanding video that they found online that came from wherever, and homegrown video made by the TAs in the class. So that's one answer, and you can see it's not like the real thing. Now I'll give you another answer from my own department, which is also not like the real thing, but it's in a different way. So junior lab in physics, so you can tell it's for juniors who major in physics. It's sort of the rite of passage for the junior year at MIT for physics majors. In normal times, you spend 20 hours a week in the lab, and you got to get the apparatus working, you got to twiddle the knobs, get the apparatus working, make the measurements, and then there's data analysis. And what the faculty who teach Junior Lab decided to do was, look, they can't twiddle the knobs. There were a couple of experiments which were remote controlled. Like there's one experiment which is conducted inside the MIT nuclear reactor, and that's remote controlled in normal time. So that one you could do it the same as always because it was always remote controlled. But most of them you couldn't actually get the experience of getting clunky apparatus, actually getting it tuned up and working and taking data and making the measurement. You couldn't do. So they focused on data analysis. They decided, okay, we'll change our learning goals for this semester. We'll do a little bit of the whatever the minimum that we can, but then we'll do data analysis. And then they said, well, once we do data analysis, instead of having our juniors analyze data that they themselves took on a little cooked up Junior Lab experiment that they've worked on for 2 weeks, why don't we have them analyze data from the Large Hadron Collider, the data that was used to discover the Higgs boson, which won the Nobel Prize a few years back. So our students the last 2 years at MIT have gotten raw data from the Large Hadron Collider, and they have discovered the Higgs particle. Okay, they've done the data analysis, pulled out the Higgs particle. They've made that discovery themselves, not having built the apparatus and made the measurement, but they've done the data analysis. And that's a really non-trivial analysis. That's a really difficult analysis. It's a needle in a haystack kind of analysis. And then another one, which they did also this past year, maybe you saw in the news when LIGO discovered gravitational waves from 2 black holes spiraling into each other and emitting gravitational waves. That's another experiment where MIT played a lead role. And so we had the raw data. So again, our students got the raw data, and then they discovered gravitational waves and black holes colliding with each other. So they had some really, really inspirational and great lab experiences, but focused on the data analysis. That's a second example. One more example. This past fall, 16 of our mechanical engineering classes mailed out kits of parts. Many of our electrical engineering classes also. And these were not just like, a few little gizmos. These were big boxes of parts. I will say, I'm glad I'm not an MIT lawyer. I really don't want to be a lawyer. I apologize to those of you who are lawyers, not my interest. But some MIT lawyer had to answer the question, which the mechanical engineers asked, is it okay for MIT to mail out power drills? MIT wanted to mail out power tools, the mechanical engineering department. So they mailed out kits of parts, they mailed out tools. They were even, I don't know if they did this, but you can get small lathes about this size. They were thinking of mailing out lathes. They may not have done that. So they spent a lot of money actually on kits of parts that they mailed out, but it's still not the same because you're by yourself doing this. I actually talked with I know a student pretty well who did one of the microelectronics labs this way. He said it was incredibly difficult getting everything debugged and working all by yourself. So it's still, the magic wasn't there necessarily, but the hardware was. So that's a third example, but that neither the neurophysiologists nor the Junior Lab people mailed out kits of parts, but many of the engineers did for mechanical and electrical engineering in particular.
Well, excellent. Krishna, I'm going to hold myself to what I said. It's 8:16, so just 1 minute over our promised time here. And I want to just echo GK, what he said. I learned a lot tonight from you. I don't work as much in higher education, but there's so many implications, I think, not just for the academic realm, but also for, I think, the corporate realm, potentially nonprofit realm. So really appreciate that. And I really want to thank everyone who came out tonight and stayed for the extended session into 8:15 here, almost going over in a half hour here. And Susan Uden has requested one of those mechanical engineering kits, so maybe get the MIT attorneys to ship one to a non-student. There you go. But no, you delivered as promised. I just wanted to revisit again when you sent me your original content for tonight. You said, I will not aim to definitively answer any of the questions you posed, but we'll speculate about some of the ways that we can use what we've learned. And I think you've really done a great job of that in terms of how to use guest speakers, how to use office hours and learn where people are engaging, how to use multimedia, to use a kind of somewhat archaic term, the chat sessions together, But then I love what you said about number 4 is just to value any and all forms of engagement. And I think, just here in Rochester, we want to invite anyone you can to next Tuesday. We're going to have our own little bit of magic in person safely at the Blades restaurant. There is an outdoor venue for that. We do encourage people to, obviously check with CDC and the county guidelines around, masking is appropriate. But we're going to be meeting from 5 to 7 next week at Blades restaurant and having some in-person engagement. And so we hope that you bring some of your energy from this conversation or others you might have attended through GRQC and join us at Blades restaurant on University Avenue in the city of Rochester, neighborhood of the arts, next Tuesday from 5 to 7 p.m. Please do visit our website at www.grqc.org to learn more about that event and other programming resources we have. And then one last final thanks to Krishna. Thank you so much for your generosity of time, sharing your insights, even your candor and some of the tough questions. And I know I really benefited from it in many ways. I'm going to be thinking about this for a long time to come, and I'm sure everyone else will. But thank you. Do you have any final words, Krishna, you want to leave us with before we depart for the evening?
Thank you, David, and thank you, Jim, and thank you both to GRQC and to the MIT Club of Rochester. And sorry I can't join you for a little liquid refreshment next Tuesday, but enjoy the gathering. And if any of you, my email is just krishna@mit.edu. If any of you'd like to talk further, just send me an email and we'll find the time to chat. Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.